All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for making the time to join us today to chat about Community Development 101 here with the Lake Superior Community Partnership. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Christopher Germain. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Lake Superior Community Partnership, and have the honor of chatting about this exciting topic with you today. So we're going to handle a couple of things today in the webinar. Number one, we'll just start with a quick recap of LSCP. Hopefully most of you know what we do at this stage, but it's always helpful to be reminded. Then we're going to talk about the connection between economic development and community development and why the LSCP is even involved in community development type of work. We'll talk a little bit about a toolbox that'll mostly be focused on downtowns, but also spread beyond those, and then do some LSCP community development initiatives, make sure you're caught up to speed on those, and then do any wrap up. So while I'm speaking today, we've got the chat and the Q&A both up. So if you have any questions that pop into mind or comments, please just pop those into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be monitoring those as we go along today. So to start off with just a quick recap on, like I said, the LSCP and the work that we do. So the LSCP is Marquette County's leading resource for economic development. We've been around for 25 years as of this year, which is a quarter of a century, and we're really excited to continue for the next quarter of a century as well. For 2023, we have 10 key focus areas that you see up here on your screen. Most of them aren't going to be a big surprise to those of you who are from Marquette County and work in the economic development field or really any other field related to the work that we do. So looking into business development, which is our true core efforts, community development, which is a field we've really expanded into in recent years, housing, childcare, and outdoor recreation to really round out those external focus areas. We have 5 internal focus areas we're working on as well to ensure that we as an organization are in the strongest position possible for the next 25 years going forward. This is our team. We've got a number of new team members here in the last month or two, and so we don't quite have all of our photos updated, but it's always helpful to put faces and names together. We have 8 full-time folks. We also have a partnership with Dickinson Area Economic Development Alliance, so Lois Ellis, their executive director, is part of our team here. And our newest member, Rebecca Dales, is a part-time project manager who is working on the Child Care Spark program, which we will talk about quite a bit. Amongst that team, you see on the right there all the credentials that we carry and we earn that allows us to really be the best we can be for Marquette County businesses and organizations. This is also something I always like to show folks about the LSCP. Just a reminder, the LSCP as an organization really does touch a lot of areas of Marquette County life, primarily around economic development. And so you'll see our foundation, in which some of the most beloved activities like the 4th of July happen through the Midwest Skills Center. And we also provide back-end services to a number of other economic development organizations, as well as local governments and organizations as well. So typically when we talk about community development, the first question I ask folks is what even is economic development, right? Because that's really, you have to go back to the high level here to understand why we're even talking about this issue. Since we're on a webinar and you can't talk back to me, we'll skip right over that particular part. But the answer that you'll always get is that it depends. And so we went to ChatGPT, like all good organizations are doing nowadays, and asked it, what is economic development? And it gave us 3 potential definitions. And so typically in general, it's talking about this idea of economic growth and improving the standard of living. And there's different ways to look at that, about how you do that, but they all end up in that general type of attitude. You'll typically hear things around job creation, wealth creation, business growth, all those things that we traditionally think about in the economic development world. This is another way to look at it in a more graphic kind of form, is what do economic developers do in particular? And there's really 3 main things that we do, working around resources, overcoming barriers to additional investment in business growth, and taking a more strategic mindset that leads to successful businesses, right? Which then lead to successful communities, right? And successful communities are connected very strongly to successful economic development organizations. So that sort of gives you a high level idea of why we even get involved in community development. But it's also important to understand that historically there's been a big shift in the way economic development as an entire field has operated in the last couple of decades. So for many years, it was a pretty simple formula. Essentially, if you had available lands, you had available infrastructure, and you were able to provide financial incentives, then you were able to attract, right, a manufacturing company or a services company or someone who might be able to provide a significant number of jobs. And a lot of times those would happen in industrial parks or sometimes just out in fairly rural areas close to urban centers, but folks would commute to work or they would move to the area for a job. That model really assumed that last part, that you could plop a business down wherever and folks would go to that. What has happened in the last couple of decades is the model has really changed, and the underlying assumption, I should say, has changed to a point where really the existence of labor within a community already is one of the defining pieces of that equation now. So it's no longer as simple of a math problem, right? You can still break it down to three pieces: available land, infrastructure, and labor. But that last piece, right, what causes people to stay in an area or be attracted to an area, is a much more complicated equation than it was before. This is another way of looking at it. I know that gray is a little hard to read on there, but this idea of community vitality, business attraction, and image, you might also hear referred to as talent, place, and people. It's this idea, or excuse me, talent, place, and business. I'm sorry. It's really this idea that, you know, businesses need people and people create a sense of place, and businesses also create a sense of place. And so you need all three of those to really operate as a cohesive economic balance. So how do you create, right, that type of place that people either live in and they want to stay in, or people are attracted to move to? And the short answer is you create a high quality of life, right? So if nobody really wants to live in a community where maybe they feel like their options are limited, they don't have a lot maybe in terms of career growth or outdoor recreation. Some folks, sometimes it's a lack of access to healthcare or food options, you know, whatever it might be. There's a lot of things that make us all determine as individuals, you know, what makes a place that we want to live the place that we want to live. And so quality of life really is central to that. And that's where community development and economic development tend to really go hand in hand. So in this sense, you can see all these icons on the screen talking about things like, you know, transportation and outdoor recreation. And typically when you talk about a place that you love, you're also going to talk about a small locally owned business that's already in that place that maybe has been there and your family has always visited for 25 years. Those are the kind of emotional connections that cause us to keep people here in the first place or to attract people to our area to live later on. So community development really involves a more collaborative approach than that a simpler equation that we mentioned earlier, right? So again, land, infrastructure, and tax incentives are now onto land, infrastructure, and labor. And to create those places, again, that people want to live, we need to take that more collaborative approach. So this idea of identifying community strengths and challenges and creating those sustainable solutions that promote long-term growth and prosperity. We're really playing the long game when it comes to community development. So how do you do that is a really common question. And there's a lot of resources out there. And so many of those resources are focused on downtowns, but we'll talk about not only those types of tools, but also other ones that are out there. So a really common one you will hear is tax increment financing. It's also oftentimes known as brownfield TIF, which we'll talk about as well. We're very familiar with that here in Marquette County. But the idea behind tax increment financing is essentially it allows a local government to make a promised future investment in a project without any sort of risk to the local government up front. So as you can see from the chart on the right there, effectively when you do a TIF or a brownfield, you lock in the existing taxable value of a project, and then you make an agreement with a developer to say, all right, you're going to handle these eligible costs, right? Maybe this site needs additional infrastructure, maybe it needs environmental cleanup, things like that. Those things cost significant money and can lead to a project not penciling out when you put it into a pro forma. So brownfield TIF then allows you to say, we will pay for those over time. And so the developer will actually pay the taxes, and then the eligible costs will be reimbursed by local government up until the end of the agreement, at which point all of the new taxable value also goes to the local government entities that were there before. Like I said earlier, it's essentially a risk-free opportunity for local governments to make a future investment in a project. The biggest risk certainly being that until the project is paid off, right, you're seeing that lower taxable value. Overall, long run, TIF is an incredibly powerful tool that we see used all across the country, but is especially used in community development projects. There's also really common tools, downtown development authorities and corridor improvement authorities. We are far more familiar with DDAs up here in Marquette County than we may be with CIAs, but they are effectively the same thing. And so they will typically use tax increment financing, special assessments, fees, and additional fundraising to basically focus on a specific area of a community, typically a downtown or a commercial corridor that the community has decided is a part of its defining character and identity as a community. And so therefore, you will see them work on events, you will see them work on redevelopment projects. They'll typically have their own plans in place. So for example, the Marquette Downtown Development Authority here in the city was instrumental in implementing the social district that just opened here this week in downtown Marquette. The DDA out in Ishpeming has a new program that will help startup businesses in the DDA district work on things. The DDA in Negaunee, of course, has been instrumental in the downtown streetscape enhancement project that's happening there as well. So these are really powerful tools. You see, I would imagine, hundreds of these across the entire state. Many of them have been in place for a long time, and they really are key tools and partners in community development. I mentioned brownfield earlier, so brownfield can happen really in a brownfield district or on a project-specific basis. So this project that you see up here on the slide is actually in Lansing, but of course we've seen brownfield TIF used in a number of areas, in particular in the city of Marquette, but also throughout the county for larger projects, hospitals, Founders Landing. I'm sure we'll see it come up in the future projects as well. But like I said, that can help really even the field, right? Because oftentimes community development is reliant on this idea of redevelopment because our communities are already established, our downtowns are already established, but as those buildings turn over and they become vacant, or they become demoed, or there was an old gas station there, or whatever, there might be some type of barrier to redevelopment. Community development tools help us overcome those barriers and change the math equation in a way that makes it an appealing development that can also meet our community needs and goals. So we also rely very heavily on grants and partnerships in the community development toolbox. So here you see a list of common ones that our communities will use around community development initiatives. DNR Trust Fund is a really big one. We're pretty good at getting those up here in the Upper Peninsula. That's a state fund that really does support not only land conservation, but also new infrastructure investments in recreation. The Michigan Department of Transportation also has an economic development division, but they can work on street rescape redesigns and complete streets, and also creating new infrastructure, transportation infrastructure to promote new economic development. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation has had an entire community development division. Those have now been integrated into a regional prosperity division, but they really focus on downtown redevelopment, housing, placemaking, and have some of the most robust tools in the state available for community development types of projects, in addition to their business development work. MISTA, which is the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, works on specifically housing, as its name would imply. So common community development types of tools we'll see coming out of MISTA right now, especially are the Missing Middle Housing Project and low income tax credits, which are actually a federal program that are run through our state agency. The Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development has an endless list of potential community development uses with their grants. And so that's another one our communities will commonly tap into. And then foundations are oftentimes an underutilized resource. Many foundations have social missions. Their goal is to create equitable communities and communities that are thriving and prosperous that will help tackle other social issues. And so you will see communities and foundations tap in to community development types of projects, ranging from infrastructure to housing to business incubators and so on. So that creates a number of opportunities. Diving deeper in particular into the Michigan Economic Development Toolbox, because you will oftentimes see these as the most common tools used, especially up here. You should be familiar with the Michigan Community Revitalization Program, or MCRP for short. So we've seen that tool used in a number of areas across our county as well. Typically again on downtown development projects. So mixed use type of projects, the CRP can fill a gap in financing. If you say needed $500,000 to rehab a downtown building, but you were only able to secure $400,000 plus your own personal equity, the MCRP could come in and fill that gap to make that project actually work. Community Development Block Grants is also another commonly used tool. It's a federally funded tool, so it tends to come with additional strings and efforts you have to go through, but we have seen CDBG used up here quite a bit, in particular with rental rehabilitation projects. So if you are familiar with anyone locally looking to maybe invest in old apartments that have fallen out of disrepair and they're on a second or third story in the downtown or a commercial corridor, rental rehab is a very generous program from a financial perspective. It just comes with quite a bit of paperwork. However, there are folks who can help you through that type of project. So if that's something that you or someone you know is interested in, please reach out for either of those two tools. And then there's two additional new ones out of that financial toolbox. One is called Build My Community, and this one is very new, just implemented this year in response to the fact that anyone can be a developer, right? So oftentimes the word developer can conjure emotions from certain people, but we rely on people to develop and invest in our communities, right, to create the types of places that we love. And so Build My Community is specifically focused towards first-time developers to work on small-scale incremental redevelopment projects that will typically be more common of a downtown. So you might see a few apartment units or a small mixed use project, things like that. And so we're seeing one of those utilized in particular in Negaunee here in Marquette County, amongst the first in the state to do so. And then Public Spaces, Community Places is a crowdfunding tool. That we are using heavily all across the state, but again, also here in Marquette County as well. So if you have an idea for a new public gathering space or a recreation field, I think it's been used for fish cleaning stations and butterfly gardens, anything that will create a sense of community. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation will match dollar for dollar up to $50,000 of crowdfunding match. And so this has been a really successful program that we would love to see utilized even more in Marquette County, but we are pretty good at utilizing it here in the first place. There's also the other side of community development around planning and zoning and regulations. And so here in particular, and with some of the work that we do with our communities at LSCP is around these more complex technical issues, because, you know, having up-to-date plans and zoning, while those things may not exactly be sexy, they are essential to facilitating investment in our communities. As a community, say you were to establish that you want your downtown to thrive and you like 2 to 3 story buildings and think those make sense, but then you build a zoning code or you keep a zoning code that maybe was built 30 years ago, doesn't allow those things by right, has an unnecessarily long review process, it doesn't incorporate modern day technology. Those are all barriers that create a longer, more unpredictable process for investment, not just in community development projects, but any type of investment at all. And so working directly with communities to make sure, right, that your plans and your zoning are up to date and as modern as possible is really beneficial. And there's 2 key programs that operate within the community development field that we highly recommend any communities really go through. One is called the Redevelopment Ready Communities Program. This again comes from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, but is something that the LSCP is helping some of our communities work through. RSC is a free program for communities to participate in. So if you're coming from a community that's not engaged in RSC and you think that they could benefit from a review of their zoning and planning and updating their internal processes, that's certainly something that we encourage you to look into. Currently, we have 4 cities in the county that are active in the program, including one that is fully certified, and then 2 more that we know are close. And there's also the Michigan Main Street, and this is tied to the National Main Street Program, which is award-winning and has been around for a really long time and made an incredible impact in a lot of communities. This one relies less on local governments and more on your DDAs and your business owners in those areas to come together and to decide on strategies for your downtown and to bring tools and resources to your downtown that make them the types of thriving places that we all want them to be. So currently, we don't have any communities in Marquette County participating in the Michigan Main Street program, and we'd love to see a few go in there. And we're hopeful that as communities finish redevelopment ready communities, that they may look to Main Street next. One other concept to know about community development is called asset-based community development, ABCD. which is again really common, this idea simply that the approach to community development should focus on identifying and leveraging existing strengths and assets of a community. And that really matters to us up here in the Upper Peninsula in particular, right, where we all live here because we love it, right? And so while communities grow and they evolve over time, you can work and make sure that you're identifying those assets and keeping those things that we love about the community in place over time. Common things for us, of course, are our outdoor recreation system as well as our mining heritage up here. And so you see those integrated into marketing and events and even new investments that are happening up here. That history isn't going away for us. It's what built us, and it's something we can continue to leverage. And we also have a number of other underutilized assets that communities are working to fix up and to then leverage into additional investment. And so this idea that the idea behind ABCD is simply that every community is different, right? You should identify those assets and then move forward. And the LSCP can help communities do that, although most of our communities up here are doing that very well on their own. So I wanted to speak a little bit about LSCB community economic development related focus areas, because again, we at our core are an economic development organization, and we're an economic development organization that historically is focused on business development, which is still an incredibly critical part of the work that we do and really our bread and butter. But creating investment environments that are positive, right, that lead to more private sector investment really require that we also dive into community development related work. So one of our focus areas simply is community development in general, and the way that you'll see us operate in that field is expanding our shared services approach with interested local governments. So most folks know at this stage that we work very closely, in particular with the city of Germain, on issues related to blights and working through the redevelopment ready communities process, working on housing, and a number of other areas that we're supporting the city in. We're open to having those conversations with other Marquette County communities as well, so that we can help them tackle their needs and add to some of their capacity. We're also working on, again, some of those quality of life issues, in particular around the expansion of air service at Marquette-Sawyer Regional Airport. We're looking to participate more in local government planning efforts from the beginning to make sure that communities are thinking about economic development and community development from the very beginning. We're convening the Transportation Task Force, which again is helping us work on that infrastructure piece and that quality of life, and then working collaboratively with local governments and other partners to identify those infrastructure needs. Housing is, of course, another big focus area in community developments. We acknowledge, right, that the lack of housing has certainly become a barrier to continued economic growth. And so we're seeking to grow new housing options by supporting the Intergovernmental Housing Task Force, establishing a general housing development strategy for our coverage area. We're working directly with developers who have interested projects and encouraging them to look at all across our county, right, areas that may be available, and to redevelop when it's feasible within their projects, to reuse existing infrastructure, and maybe create new community defining assets for us. And then we have a very close partnership with the Marquette County Land Bank to pursue housing grants and resources, mostly tied to that Intergovernmental Housing Task Force that has gone out there. Another community development related area is childcare. We again recognize that the deficit in available childcare options, which exist everywhere across our country at this stage, is impacting labor force. And so again, it's a quality of life issue, and one of those things that we work on to enhance our communities, to create vibrancy and to create positive investment environments for them. Our main focus in this area is providing operational support to the Childcare Spark Home Business Incubator, which is now in its third week of classes, and we're really excited to see numerous participants working their way through opening home-based childcare businesses that will be spread throughout the county. We're also working on cohesively as a region on a childcare planning grant, which will help us access more state resources. And then the LSCP is continually involved in these types of conversations and connecting folks who are interested in starting childcare businesses or expanding existing ones to Marquette County to make sure that they can find the resources that are available to do so. And then the last one that we really focus on is outdoor recreation. We understand, right, that our natural environment is both a quality of life asset and an economic opportunity for us. And so LSCP is currently providing operational support to the Sustainable Trails Master Planning Initiative, which is currently underway, and we'll see some more public engagement around that initiative later this year. We're also working in partnership with other economic development organizations on a RISE grant, which supports outdoor recreation innovation in particular. So you may have heard of Shop House Park and other things like that. Those are our true tie between leveraging our quality of life and community development efforts that are happening here to attract additional private sector investment to our area, which again goes full circle to create an even higher quality of life for all of us out here. And then the LSCP is constantly at the table around additional outdoor recreation discussions and opportunities that are taking place. And then one that's a little new and you won't necessarily see in some of our other documents out there around focus areas, but one that is, and we've started to talk about much more directly, is our small business work. We've always been heavily invested in small businesses and maybe haven't been the greatest about telling that story, in particular with the fact that 95% of our county businesses here really meet the standard definition of a small business. And so our business retention visits work really help us keep a pulse on emerging needs and challenges. This is especially true, again, of smaller businesses where you may only have 1 or 2 employees. And those are typically the community defining businesses that we'll find in our downtowns. We provide reciprocal memberships to the Small Business Association of Michigan. We provide access to free or reduced cost business planning and development services. And we recently established a small business advisory council, which will help us guide and continue to grow our small business assets and resources for folks. So if you are sitting here on the webinar today and you are a small business owner, or you are interested in this work, or you know somebody who is, and you're interested in serving on that advisory council, we are still taking interest for that, with an anticipation of meeting in August for our first meeting. So community development can be a big topic. It's effectively impossible to cover everything, even in a whole hour. So we condensed it down, hoping to just give you a general overview of what the topic entails, right? Ranging from those tools to those general concepts to the ties to economic development. But there's 4 resources that you see up here on your screen that if you're interested in this stuff, we encourage you to do more research into. And these are really just 4 initial ones. You'll go down the rabbit hole if you go to these and then start finding others as well. So the Redevelopment Ready Communities Online Academy is not just for local government staff or officials. Anyone can take that, and we encourage other folks to take it to gain a deeper understanding of planning and zoning, and in particular how it ties to economic and community development. Michigan State University Extension has a citizen planner program, which again is a really in-depth dive into planning and zoning and understanding again how all those ties happen. Strong Towns is a nonprofit based out of Minnesota that works nationwide, really good to focus on community development and investments and infrastructure and walkable corridors and downtowns. And the Community Economic Developers Association of Michigan, called CEDM for short, can provide all sorts of resources around housing, placemaking, asset-based community developments, and other topics that we have discussed today. So we encourage you to go all of these, all of them with the extension of Citizen Planner are things that you can access at least part of their resources for free without additional funds. And really with that, like I said, we were really just trying to give you a general overview of community developments and the work that we're doing in the field. We think this is really the beginning of our work in community developments. We've been really appreciative of the support that we've received as we've stepped into this field. I think working around housing, childcare, trails, infrastructure, and all these things that create this quality of life and create a more positive investment environment for all of us are things worth continuing to invest in at the LSCP. So with that, I don't see any questions or chats at the moment, but we will give it a second and see if anyone has any questions or chats before we shut it down. All right, I'm not seeing anything pop in, and we're starting to lose a couple of folks. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we will see you on our next webinar. Thanks.